May 12, 1944. The skies over western Germany burned with the glare of exploding flak shells. Far above the quiet countryside near Bonn, engines roared like thunder rolling across the heavens. It was a clear day, perfect for interception. The Luftwaffe pilots knew it. And so did the men flying the American escort fighters that cut their way across enemy territory. "Look at them," one German pilot muttered over the radio in a cocky, almost amused tone. "Thunderbolts, fat, slow pigs." His voice carried the kind of arrogance only experience, or overconfidence, could breed. To him, the Republic P-47 Thunderbolt was a clumsy brute, good for taking punishment, but hardly a match for the sleek, knife-like Messerschmitt Bf-109 he sat in. Below, a formation of B-17 bombers droned on, heavy with their deadly cargo, bound for a railway hub that fed the German war machine. They were escorted by Thunderbolts, their wings glinting in the sun. To the German pilots circling above like hawks, these bombers were prey, and the escorts, just an inconvenience. But what they underestimated that day was not the speed of the Thunderbolt, nor its agility. It was the terrifying symphony that would erupt when its 8.50 caliber Browning machine guns opened fire. The radio crackled again. "Achtung! Amerikaner, Zweier!" The warning came too late. The sky above the formation was already filling with dark specks, enemy fighters dropping out of the sun. Engines screamed. Propellers blurred. The hunt was on. Inside the cockpit of one German Bf-109, Lieutenant Klaus Richter leaned forward, grinning beneath his oxygen mask. He'd flown dozens of sorties. He'd shot down more than he could count. To him, the Thunderbolt was just another easy target. But as he pushed the stick forward and dove toward the American line, the first burst of heavy .50 caliber fire erupted from below. The air around him flashed with deadly streaks. It was not the wild spray of a desperate rookie. It was precise, coordinated, relentless. "Skies!" he hissed. He jerked his stick to roll out, but the rounds were already biting into his plane's fuselage like an angry swarm of hornets. In the Thunderbolt cockpit, Lieutenant James "Red" Hawkins held the trigger down. The vibration shook his entire arm. 8 machine guns roared together, filling the sky with a sheet of lead. His P-47 wasn't sleek. It wasn't elegant. But it was a flying sledgehammer. And that day, the hammer came down. Smoke trailed from the Bf-109's wing as Klaus Richter felt his aircraft shudder violently. He tried to pull up. Too late. The sky he once owned was no longer his. Down below, bomber crews cheered into their radios as they watched the German fighter spiral out of control. "Thunderbolt's got him! He's going down!" But that was just the opening shot of a battle that would stretch for miles across the German countryside. Neither side knew it yet, but May 12th would etch itself into the memory of those who lived through it. The Thunderbolts weren't here to run. They were here to own the sky. The Luftwaffe pilots, laughing just moments earlier, now realized they were not facing pigs in the sky, they were facing monsters. The air was alive with chaos now. Black smoke trails twisted against the blue canvas of the sky, flak bursts bloomed like black flowers, and the steady drone of bombers was broken by the savage snarl of fighters tearing into each other. Every pilot, friend or foe, was locked in a deadly dance where a single hesitation meant death. Lieutenant James "Red" Hawkins felt the stick shudder under his grip. His P-47 wasn't nimble like the Messerschmitt Bf-109 or the Focke-Wulf FW-190, but it had something the Germans hadn't counted on that day: raw, brutal endurance. A Thunderbolt could take hits that would tear a lighter plane apart, and still keep flying, still keep fighting. Above him, tracer fire stitched the air. One Bf-109 swooped down on the bomber stream like a predator pouncing on prey. Red rolled his aircraft, his canopy filling with sunlight for a split second, then leveled out behind the German. The enemy pilot didn't notice. Not yet. He squeezed the trigger again. The Thunderbolt roared. 8.50 caliber Brownings lit up like a chain of thunderclaps, spitting lead in a tight, punishing stream. The rounds ripped into the German fighter's tail section, shredding control surfaces like paper. "Hit! He's hit!" a voice yelled over the bomber frequency. The Bf-109 pitched forward violently, trailing smoke, and spiraled toward the forests below. Red didn't have time to celebrate. Another German dove in from high above. "Red! Brake right! Brake right!" someone barked over the radio. Red slammed the stick to the side, feeling the G-forces crush his chest as he peeled away just in time. Cannon shells ripped through the space where his plane had been a heartbeat earlier. The German overshot too fast, too eager. Red leveled his wings and grinned beneath his mask. "Your move, hotshot!" But these weren't rookies he was up against. The German pilots this day were veterans, men who'd fought since the early years of the war, men who had once ruled the skies of Europe. And they weren't going down without a fight. Lieutenant Klaus Richter's wingman, Oberfeldwebel Karl Jaeger, saw Red's Thunderbolt arc across the sky and banked in pursuit. His Bf-109 sliced through the air like a blade, closing the distance. "I have him," he muttered, cold and focused. The two fighters were locked together now, twisting and turning through cloud wisps like predators in a storm. Red felt his heartbeat hammering in his chest, sweat stinging his eyes. He wasn't just flying. He was fighting to stay alive. Bullets whined past his canopy. He felt the impact of a hit in his left wing, nothing critical, but a reminder that this was no game. Karl lined up his sights. He could almost feel victory in his hands. One more squeeze and the American would be gone. But Red wasn't giving him that chance. He kicked the rudder hard, rolled inverted, and dove straight down. The Thunderbolt's massive weight worked in his favor now. It was a stone dropping from the sky, its speed climbing fast. Karl followed, teeth clenched, knowing this was dangerous. Too dangerous. But he couldn't let go. Not now. Wind screamed. The altimeter spun. Both planes hurtled toward the treetops below at breakneck speed. Red could feel the airframe shudder as he dove, the wings of his Republic P-47 Thunderbolt cutting through the cold air like a sword. His instruments blurred from the vibration. His breath came heavy. He'd pushed the dive further than he'd ever dared before. But that was exactly what he needed. The German in the Bf-109 above him wasn't built for this kind of punishment. Karl Jaeger's heart slammed against his ribs. The needle on his airspeed indicator climbed past the red line. The control stick stiffened, warning him that the aircraft was reaching its limits. The Bf-109 was fast and nimble at altitude, but in a dive like this, it was a coffin waiting to close. Red pulled back gently, inch by inch, leveling out just above the tree line. The branches blurred beneath him like a green river rushing past. His G-suit hissed as it tried to keep the blood in his brain. He leveled out, teeth gritted, fighting the urge to black out. Karl tried to follow, but it was too late. His plane began to buffet violently. The wings groaned. A deadly shudder ran through the frame as he pulled with everything he had. The Thunderbolt climbed away. The Messerschmitt never fully recovered. At that speed, the dive had become a trap. Karl's fighter slammed into the trees in an explosion of flame and debris, a black plume rising over the forest. Red didn't look back. There wasn't time. He climbed back toward the bomber formation, breathing hard. His plane had taken hits. He could feel it in the sluggish response of the left aileron. But she was still flying. She always did. "Two down," he muttered, voice hoarse. Above, the fight raged on. Dozens of fighters twisted through the sky in lethal arcs, a deadly ballet of metal and fire. The bombers droned steadily forward, their gunners spraying defiance at any German who came too close. Lieutenant Klaus Richter, having barely survived the opening barrage, climbed back into the fight. He wasn't laughing anymore. His squadron was taking losses, and the Americans weren't breaking like they once did. He spotted Red's Thunderbolt climbing and lined up behind him, his teeth clenched, his breath fogging the inside of his canopy. This time, he would not underestimate. He nudged the throttle forward. The Bf-109 responded like a hunting dog catching a scent. He was gaining. Slowly. Methodically. In the Thunderbolt, Red scanned his mirrors. A dark speck moved against the sun. His gut clenched. Damn it! He shoved the throttle to the wall. The engine howled. But the German was closing in. Above them, contrails twisted like scars across the sky. Below, bombs began to fall toward their target, a railway junction that fed German divisions on the Western Front. The ground war and the air war were colliding in a single, violent moment. And high above it all, one German pilot and one American pilot were on a collision course with fate. The sun cut through the high-altitude haze, glaring off the aluminum skin of the bomber stream. Red's Thunderbolt roared as he pushed the throttle forward, but no matter how hard the big radial engine bellowed, the Messerschmitt behind him crept closer, its narrow frame slicing through the air with the precision of a scalpel. Lieutenant Klaus Richter narrowed his eyes behind his goggles. His finger rested lightly on the trigger. He'd been here many times before, hunting, closing in, waiting for the perfect shot. His squadron had mocked the Thunderbolts endlessly. Too slow. Too heavy. They called them Fliegenfasser, flying barrels. But now, as he watched the American pilot jink and weave to stay alive, Klaus knew this was no easy kill. Tracer fire slashed past Red's canopy, green streaks of light whipping by like angry hornets. He yanked the stick left hard. The Thunderbolt lurched, heavy but obedient, rolling just in time to avoid a burst that would have chewed through his cockpit. Klaus gritted his teeth and adjusted his aim. The distance was closing. His wingmates were scattered across the battlefield now, some chasing bombers, some already falling in flames. This duel had become personal. Come on, come on! Red muttered through gritted teeth. His knuckles were white on the stick. The Thunderbolt could outdive the German, but in level flight, the Bf-109 had the edge. He needed something, a distraction, an angle, anything. Suddenly, like an answer, another Thunderbolt streaked in from above and behind Klaus. It was Lieutenant Bill Mason, Red's squadron mate. He'd been high cover, circling, waiting for his moment. "Red, I've got your tail!" Mason's voice crackled over the radio. Klaus saw the flash of silver in his mirror. "Verdammt!" he hissed. He rolled his aircraft hard left, but the delay was fatal. Mason squeezed his trigger, and the air filled with the roar of .50 caliber guns. The rounds slammed into Klaus's tail assembly, ripping fabric, shattering metal. His plane jerked violently as the rudder failed. He slammed the stick forward, trying to dive out. Mason stayed with him, relentless. "Light him up, Bill! Light him up!" Red barked into the radio, banking away to give his wingman room. Klaus twisted, fighting his crippled machine. His once graceful Bf-109 now bucked like a wounded animal. He pulled into a steep dive, hoping speed would save him. But Mason was on him like a shadow, his guns chewing away at the Germans' defenses. The canopy of the Messerschmitt cracked. Smoke poured from its tail. Klaus clenched his jaw, refusing to bail out. If this was the day he went down, he'd go. But even as his plane bled altitude, he spotted something, a chance. Below them, the bomber formation began to shift, escorted by more Thunderbolts. The Germans still had a few fighters high above. Klaus could draw Mason into their crosshairs. With a desperate roll, he cut left and dove straight into the heart of the formation, vanishing into the chaos. Mason followed. And that was exactly what Klaus wanted. Bill Mason's Thunderbolt thundered through the clouds as he followed the smoking Bf-109 into the bomber stream. His breathing was steady but sharp, his heartbeat hammering in rhythm with the engine. He had Klaus Richter locked in his sights, and he wasn't about to let him slip away. "Red, I'm going in," Mason called out, his voice hard with focus. "Watch yourself in there, Bill," Red warned. "It's thick." And thick it was. All around them, B-17 bombers lumbered forward, their engines beating a steady rhythm like a drumline of war. Machine gunners in the bombers' turrets scanned the skies, firing bursts at any shadow that came too close. The sky was a tangled storm of flak, gunfire, and twisting contrails. Klaus knew every inch of this battlefield. This was his sky. For years, the Luftwaffe had dominated it. He darted through the gaps between bombers, hugging their blind spots, using them like shields against Mason's incoming fire. Mason fired again, and tracers zipped dangerously close to a bomber's wing. Damn it! He couldn't take the shot without risking hitting their own. Klaus rolled hard, smoke trailing, and vanished beneath the formation. Inside the Thunderbolt cockpit, Mason cursed under his breath. "Slippery bastard!" Klaus's radio hissed. "Richter! Where are you?" It was Oberleutnant Vogel, one of the few remaining German pilots still in the fight. Below the formation. "I've got one on me," Klaus barked back. "Lead him down." "I see you." Vogel banked his Bf-109 from above, diving like a hawk. His cannons opened up. Mason didn't see him until the tracers lit up his right wing. The plane jolted, alarms screamed, and the world tilted sideways. "Bill! You've got one on your 6! Red's voice shouted over the comms. Mason yanked the stick and rolled, the Thunderbolt groaning from the sudden stress. Bullets tore past his canopy, some finding their mark on the rear fuselage. The plane bucked but held together. "Hang on, Bill. I'm coming!" Red barked, pulling his P-47 into a climb, lining up the enemy above. Vogel grinned inside his cockpit. He had the American pinned. A few more bursts and Mason would be out of the sky. But then, Red arrived. He came in from behind and below, unseen, closing fast. The second Vogel adjusted his sights, Red pressed the trigger. The .50s thundered again. A wall of lead tore through the air. Vogel's Bf-109 shuddered, its tail assembly disintegrating. Flames licked the fuselage. He tried to pull up, but the aircraft twisted and began to spin. A wall of lead tore through the air. Vogel's Bf-109 shuddered, its tail assembly disintegrating. Flames licked the fuselage. He tried to pull up, but the aircraft twisted and began to spin. Red exhaled, watching the Germans spiral toward the fields below. Scratch one. Mason steadied his plane, panting. Thanks, Red thought I was toast. But above them, Klaus was still alive. His aircraft, though damaged, had slipped away through the bomber stream, climbing again into the thin air where he had the advantage. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. High above the bomber formation, the battlefield stretched like a burning tapestry. Smoke trails lingered in the air. Wreckage fell in flaming arcs toward the green fields below. Radios buzzed with frantic chatter, the sound of men fighting for their lives. Klaus Richter steadied his crippled Bf-109, the stick stiff in his hands. The tail was half gone, but the engine still roared defiant. He wiped blood from his forehead with a gloved hand, the cut from shrapnel stinging. He wasn't running. Not yet. He'd spent too long in this war to turn away. Every instinct told him to dive out, return to base, and live to fight another day. But pride was louder than reason. Pride, and something else, anger. He banked right, climbing higher, searching the chaos below for the two Thunderbolts that had torn his squadron apart. He found them easily. The silver planes glinted against the clouds, circling like wolves guarding their prey. Klaus pushed his throttle forward. The engine coughed but answered. He leveled off behind the sun, invisible from below. His thumb hovered over the trigger. You'll bleed for this, Americaner, he growled under his breath. Below, Red and Mason reformed, their voices steady but strained. You still flying? Red asked. Barely, Mason replied with a dry laugh. I'll buy you a beer if we live through this. Make it two. And a steak. The brief moment of humor vanished when Red caught the shimmer of something above the sun. His stomach turned cold. Mason, we've got company. Klaus dove like a hawk, silent and swift. His guns opened up before they even saw him. Tracers sliced through the sky, stitching across Mason's right wing. Mason yelled, jerking the stick. The Thunderbolt shook violently, smoke pouring from its wingtip. I'm hit! Red spun his Thunderbolt around, climbing into Klaus's path. The two aircraft streaked toward each other head-on, either pilot flinching. At that moment, the sky felt small. The entire war seemed to compress into this collision course between two men, two planes, and two nations. Red squeezed the trigger. Klaus did the same. Tracer fire erupted in both directions, a wall of death between them. They flashed past each other, close enough for Red to see the cold fire in the German's eyes. Both planes came out smoking. Neither pilot looked back. They turned. The duel had begun again. The sky around them twisted into a maelstrom of steel and smoke. Klaus Richter pulled hard on his stick, feeling the Bf-109 shudder beneath him. The tail creaked, the engine coughed black smoke, but the old fighter still answered his commands like a wounded predator refusing to die. Red yanked his Thunderbolt into a high G-turn, feeling his vision gray at the edges. His blood hammered in his ears like war drums. The cockpit rattled as the big radial engine roared in defiance. Behind him, Mason's damaged plane limped along, leaking smoke but staying airborne. The two men circled like wolves, sizing each other up, each waiting for the other to make a fatal mistake. The radio was silent now. There was no room for chatter. Only breathing. Only instinct. Klaus dipped his nose, feinting left. Red reacted, too fast. The German pulled back sharply, swinging right, cutting inside Red's turn. For a heartbeat, the Thunderbolt's massive frame drifted into Klaus's sights. Klaus squeezed the trigger. Cannons barked. Tracers streaked like hot needles through the air. Red felt the impact. A burst ripped into the outer right wing, shaking the aircraft. He grimaced, fighting the controls. The P-47 could take punishment, but too many hits, and even the toughest machine would fold. Red! Mason's voice cracked over the comm, broken by static. You good? I'm still here. Red growled through clenched teeth. He rolled out, pulling the Thunderbolt into a shallow dive. The German followed, confident, closing the distance. The sun cut through the clouds in blinding flashes, making the duel almost surreal, a dance of shadows and light. Red inhaled slowly. He'd been outmaneuvered. The P-47 wasn't built for tight turns like the Bf-109. But it had something else. Weight. Speed. Power. He pushed the nose down and let gravity do its work. The airspeed climbed past 400 miles per hour. The Thunderbolt screamed as it plunged toward the treetops below. Klaus followed, narrowing his eyes. He'd lost two men today. He wouldn't let this one slip away. But Red wasn't running. The ground rushed up, green and brown blurring beneath him. At the last possible second, he pulled back, feeling the airframe shudder violently. The G-force hit him like a punch to the chest. The Thunderbolt leveled out, barely. Klaus tried to follow. His crippled Bf-109 groaned in protest, its damaged tail fighting against the strain. It wasn't built for this kind of punishment anymore. Red yanked up into a vertical climb, using the energy from the dive to rocket skyward like a silver bullet. Klaus tried to match the climb, and stalled. The Messerschmitt bucked, its nose falling as it lost lift. Klaus cursed under his breath, slamming the throttle forward, fighting to recover. Red rolled his Thunderbolt at the top of the climb and came down behind the German like an executioner lowering his blade. "Mason," he muttered, voice steady now. "I've got him." Klaus's Bf-109 leveled out just above the tree line, struggling to regain speed. He pulled up hard, but the damaged tail was sluggish, unresponsive. His breath fogged the inside of his oxygen mask as he glanced in the mirror. His blood turned cold. The Thunderbolt was behind him. Red's voice was a low growl in his own cockpit, barely audible even to himself. "Got you, you son of a bitch!" He lined up his sights, the reticle dancing over the Messerschmitt's tail. The German pilot tried every trick in the book, rolling, yawing, skidding through the air, but the Thunderbolt stayed glued to him like a hunting dog. Red squeezed the trigger. The 8.50 caliber Brownings erupted in perfect harmony, a metallic chorus of death. The nose of the Thunderbolt shook violently from the recoil. Bright tracers slashed through the sky. Klaus jerked his stick, but the round slammed into his right wing, tearing through metal and fabric. A second burst chewed into the fuselage. The aircraft shuddered, trailing smoke like a dying animal. "Verdammt!" he spat, kicking the rudder pedal. He wasn't done. Not yet. Red fired again, walking the rounds forward. They struck the tail assembly, slicing the rudder apart. Klaus lost control. The Bf-109 twisted, wobbling through the air in a sickening spin. "Bail out, bail out!" a German voice screamed over the Luftwaffe frequency. Klaus's gloved hands fumbled for the canopy release. The wind screamed around him, shaking the entire aircraft. He was spinning toward the forest below, each rotation faster than the last. And then, he stopped. Not the fall. The hesitation. The moment of decision. He could bail and live. Or ride it down and die with the machine he'd spent years mastering. The canopy flew off. A figure tumbled into the open air, a white parachute snapping open like a flower against the blue. Red exhaled, steadying his breathing. He didn't cheer. There was no triumph in watching another man fall. Just the grim silence of war. "Red, is it over?" Mason's voice was weak but steady over the radio. Red scanned the horizon. Smoke trails stretched for miles. Bombers pushed on toward their target, escorted now by what remained of the squadron. German fighters were scattered or falling. "It's over for him," Red said quietly. He turned his Thunderbolt toward Mason's smoking plane, climbing to form up. The battle wasn't completely over. The bombers still had to make it home, but the duel that had begun with a laugh had ended with a fall. The once clear skies over Germany now hung heavy with smoke and the broken remnants of war. The bomber formation pushed relentlessly forward, their bomb bay doors opening like iron jaws ready to bite. The ground below shimmered in heat and fire as anti-aircraft batteries tried to tear the sky apart. Red and Mason flew side by side, one plane scarred and leaking smoke, the other scorched but unbroken. Their duel with Klaus had left its mark, not just on their aircraft, but on their souls. Red's hands still trembled slightly on the stick. Adrenaline was wearing off, leaving behind a bone-deep fatigue. Mason coughed through his oxygen mask, fighting to stay conscious. "Bill, how bad is it?" Red asked. "She's hurt," Mason answered with a forced laugh. "But I've flown worse. You should have seen me over Sicily." Yeah, Red muttered, but he smiled faintly beneath his mask. Ahead of them, the bombers released their payload. Hundreds of bombs tumbled earthward, whistling like screaming ghosts before slamming into the railway yards below. The ground erupted in a rolling wave of fire and smoke, a thunderclap that shook the air. But victory wasn't guaranteed yet. Far ahead, radar operators reported another wave of enemy fighters scrambling. The Luftwaffe wasn't finished. "Not today." Red's radio crackled with the voice of their squadron leader. "All P-47s, tighten formation. Stay sharp. We're not home free." Mason groaned softly, flexing his stiff hand on the throttle. "You think they'll send more?" "They always do," Red replied. He glanced down at the forest where Klaus's parachute had drifted. Somewhere down there, the German pilot was either being captured, rescued, or lying silent among the trees. Their battle had ended, but the war didn't care. It simply moved on, relentless and hungry. The bomber stream turned toward home. Engines droned like the heartbeat of a giant. The Thunderbolts tightened their escort lines, wings almost overlapping. The horizon glowed faintly orange from distant fires. The sky wasn't done with them. Not yet. As the bomber formation droned westward, the horizon seemed endless, a cold, thin blue that hid both hope and death behind its clouds. Red leaned back in his seat, his flight suit damp with sweat. The steady thrum of the engine beneath his boots was the only thing keeping him tethered to the moment. Mason's voice came over the comm, weaker now. "Red, she's not climbing as well as before. Hang in there, Bill. Just keep her level. We'll get home." But home wasn't close. And the Luftwaffe wasn't finished. 20 miles behind the bomber formation, another German squadron scrambled from an airfield near Cologne. Pilots ran across the tarmac, climbing into their fighters. Another wave of Focke-Wulf FW-190, rugged, powerful machines that could tear through damaged Thunderbolts like paper. Among them was Oberleutnant Erich Voss, a seasoned ace with 20 kills to his name. He listened to the briefing in silence. The Americans had hit hard. They'd lost Klaus Richter. And now, it was his turn to make them pay. "Engines up!" someone shouted in German. The airfield trembled as the FW-190s roared down the runway and lifted into the gray sky. Red's radar warning system was primitive, but the chatter from the lead flight told him what he already felt in his bones. "They're coming," he muttered. "More?" Mason croaked. "Yeah. More." The formation tightened. Every Thunderbolt pilot knew the next few minutes would be the real test. Damaged aircraft, exhausted men, and another wave of fresh German fighters. Red flexed his fingers on the trigger. His ammo count was lower now, but his resolve burned hotter. The sky ahead looked calm. But behind it, the hunters were coming. The sky over France burned with streaks of orange as the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the airfield. That night, the Luftwaffe pilots gathered in a small, dimly lit operations room. Maps of the Western Front were scattered on the table, with colored pins marking recent air engagements. The tension was palpable. The Allies had grown stronger, deadlier. Even the most seasoned German pilots were beginning to feel the shift. Oberleutnant Heinrich Brandt sat quietly at the corner, polishing his flight goggles. He was one of the loudest voices who had once mocked the American aircraft. He remembered his first sighting of the Republic P-47 Thunderbolt. He had laughed, calling it a flying pig, too fat, too heavy, too clumsy to ever match the sleek lines of the Messerschmitt Bf-109. But lately, that laughter had faded. He had seen too many friends not return from sorties against the Thunderbolts. Outside, the mechanics worked tirelessly under floodlights, refueling and arming the fighters. The sound of hammers on metal echoed in the cold night air. Fuel fumes mixed with the earthy scent of damp grass. One mechanic muttered under his breath, "The sky belongs to them now." But no one dared say it too loudly. Meanwhile, at a nearby Allied base, American pilots were being briefed for another mission. Captain James Red Halpern ran his hand over the side of his Thunderbolt, the cold metal catching the faint moonlight. He had lost 2 men last week to German flak, but tonight felt different. The briefing was short and clear. Escort bombers deep into German territory, then engage enemy fighters. "Remember," the squadron leader barked. "Keep formation, and don't let them sucker you into dogfights on their terms. We own the sky. Let's remind them of that." The next morning, at first light, Heinrich's squadron scrambled. Engines roared to life, slicing through the early mist. Across the channel, Thunderbolts were already climbing to altitude, their wings gleaming as they formed up like a flock of hawks. Two forces, born to clash, were hurtling toward each other. Heinrich tightened his gloves, feeling the vibration of his engine through the controls. "This will be different," he muttered. High above the clouds, both sides spotted each other. There was no hesitation. Radios crackled. "Bandits at 2 o'clock! Thunderbolts inbound!" Heinrich pushed his throttle forward. The Bf-109 surged ahead. The hunt was on. The air battle exploded into chaos. The first exchange came in a flash, contrails twisting like ribbons as fighters broke formation, diving and climbing in a deadly ballet. The Thunderbolts moved in tight groups, their pilots disciplined and unshaken. Then came the roar. 8 synchronized .50 caliber machine guns spat fire from each P-47, unleashing a torrent of lead that tore through the morning sky. Heinrich swung hard left, narrowly avoiding a curtain of bullets. But others weren't so lucky. One Bf-109 burst into flames, spinning out of control, its tail sheared clean off by the concentrated fire. "Mein Gott, they're everywhere!" a German pilot shouted over the radio before static swallowed his voice. Halpern locked onto a lone German climbing away. He squeezed the trigger. The Thunderbolt shuddered as the guns thundered. A wall of tracers reached out, tearing through the Luftwaffe plane's fuselage. The German pilot tried to roll, but the wings snapped. The aircraft plunged like a dying bird. Heinrich, panting, dove into the cloud layer, his breath fogging the inside of his canopy. This wasn't the slow, heavy beast he had once mocked. This was a flying fortress with claws of steel. The Thunderbolts didn't chase like hounds, they hunted like lions. As the battle dragged on, the German formation fractured under the relentless American assault. What once had been confidence was now survival instinct. Pilots who used to taunt their enemies now whispered silent prayers in their cockpits. Above them, the Thunderbolts owned the sky, their engines howling like a storm. Heinrich emerged from the clouds, only to find a Thunderbolt on his tail. He jerked the stick, twisting violently, the G-forces crushing his chest. But the P-47 stayed locked, relentless. A burst of fire tore across his wing, sending sparks flying. The world narrowed to a single, brutal truth. The enemy he had laughed at now held the power of life and death. With smoke trailing from his crippled aircraft, Heinrich bailed out. As his parachute opened, he drifted helplessly, watching the Thunderbolts carve through the sky like gods of war. His arrogance was gone, burned away by the reality of American firepower. On the ground, Allied pilots returned to base, engines cooling, faces grim but victorious. They never saw it coming, Halpern muttered, pulling off his helmet. The legend of the Thunderbolt was no joke anymore. It was the sound of 8.50 caliber guns hammering the sky, and the moment laughter died on the lips of those who underestimated it.